Next up, we have Verity Beames from the Faculty of Education. Verity is going to tell us about over the line or upholding the profession.
Just be careful of that one.
Principal
Right,
evaluation of determining teacher proficiency.
Thank you so
Verity.
much. Thanks everybody for having me here today. This is the very first time that I have spoken outside of any candidature reviews and so on around my research. I'm a teacher at heart. I'm wearing my heart on my sleeve, so be kind and gentle to me today. Wendy is actually one of my supervisors. It's the first time that Wendy and I have ever met physically, because I started my professional doctorate when COVID hit, and every residential that I had planned to come on didn't happen. So I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land upon which we're gathering today. I have travelled from Gimoy, and the traditional custodians there are the Gimoy Wallaby Yidinji people. And I'd also like to acknowledge my grandchildren's land upon which they gather from, and that is the Quincan country. I have fabulous genes, by the way, for anybody going, you have grandchildren. Yes, I have two little Aboriginal boys, and they're absolutely gorgeous. One is absolutely wild and runs around, and the other one is just beautiful, soft and kind, and very, very quiet. So I'm really just going to do a bit of a deep dive into my presentation. I'm hoping to finish my professional doctorate by the end of the year, and we'll be graduating next Easter. So I'm really doing a bit of a background today, a bit of research into the methodology, and really just wanting to present the findings and discussion. And the discussion is currently the chapter that I am plodding through as I write at the moment, before I get to some recommendations. And I've got some light touch recommendations I'd like to present today. Thank you. So just take a moment and have a look at this scenario here. I'll just give you a second to have a look, but basically I'm talking about education. Apologies to anyone who is in the medical field. I have made a scenario up, but I just want to give you a contrast between a medical scenario and a lived reality example of the world that I'm living in. So think about this doctor who's part of a surgical team. Senior doctor and a colleague are having a conversation in the hallway corridor at a hospital, and this is how it goes. Hey, how's Dr. Brown going this year? I mean, with her work. Does she need any support? And the colleague responds, she's okay, just getting on with learning the job. You know what, I'll check in later in the month and see if she needs anything. The senior doctor continues, well, if she survives the year, then you know what? To me, she's a surgeon. Let Dr. Brown just get on with it. I don't have time to check her progress against the Medical Board of Standards. I'll talk to her first, but you know what? I'm intending to check her off her doctor registration form at the end of the year anyway. Move to a lived reality. Teacher education. If a teacher survives the year, then to me, they're a teacher. I have an incidental conversation with my curriculum person. Okay, how's Teacher Brown going? You know what? My process really is just to let them get on with it. I'm not going back to the ATSL teacher standards or the Queensland teacher registration process. I just let them be a teacher. Quote unquote, an excerpt from my research. The profession that teaches all other professions. So the context and research, really. There was a report that came out in 2018 that basically identified that there was variation in the focus, processes and evidence that they found about what the teacher needs to demonstrate to be known as a proficient teacher. And they found that this variation came from place of employment, sector and jurisdiction, that there was no clear rigorous process for principals to follow, and that this negatively affected confidences in consistent outcomes. No surprise, I'm sure. So this is my research aim. So I've been spending the last 3.5 years investigating how principals evaluate the evidence provided by graduate teachers seeking to be recognised at the proficient career stage of the Australian Professional Standards for Teachers. So once you leave university, you have a graduate level assigned to you. At the end of 1 year of teaching, or 200 days, you are able to put your evidence in to say, I have demonstrated that I am a proficient teacher. Now, that is the same across all states and territories, but each state and territory determines the nuances to how that looks. My research is in Queensland, so I'm looking at the QCT. You'll hear me refer to graduate or ECT, which is early career teacher. As part of the ATSL standards, the Australian Professional Standards for Teachers, there are 2 other levels, which are highly accomplished and lead teacher, and they're optional if you want to pursue them, and they are an external process that validates whether you have provided evidence at those levels. I'm an assessor for those levels, which is how I found the gap in the proficient level of the Australian Professional Standards for Teachers. So these are the 3 research questions. How does an early career teacher seek to move to the proficient level of the Australian Professional Standards, and how is that QCT registration process enacted? What specific evidence does the principal expect from that graduate teacher to produce so that they have demonstrated that they are at that proficient level? And how do they communicate their expectations? What are they wanting, and how do they share that with those teachers? And then really, what's the underlying self-stated rationale for how that decision is made? So just to give you a bit of a background here, I'm not trying to change the QCT process. That has been changed already and evolved, and it doesn't change much. It's still a guideline. It's still optional to how you do it to get to the end point. I'm not trying to influence a transference of information to every context across Australia. I'm very much looking in a very small part of the world. And the methodology that I used was the constructivist interpretivist paradigm, which really for me was to try and make sense of the lived reality of each participant and develop new knowledge. So I'm trying to understand how those principles make the decision making in education, specifically around minimum standard of teaching level in Queensland. I use reflexive thematic analysis by Braun and Clark to interrogate the data, generate themes, and then value my research and knowledge, not keep it separate, but acknowledge that I have experience and that experience brings something to this research. And then really trying to understand it with Brofenbrenner's 1977 ecological systems model, which really is a framework to understand the interdependent factors that influence principal decision-making. So my design method was semi-structured interviews. There are 20 primary principles that were in the possible pool of potential participants. And that was because they were all in a primary school, and that means that they would have similar staffing levels, similar structures, similar processes within their primary context. The minute I go to secondary or P to 12s, it meant that there were too many variables that might influence how I came to the recommendations of this research. 13 out of 20 actually were part of the pool that actually I did interviews with. Zoom or face-to-face, that was very much up to them. They took about an hour. I used an interview guide to basically frame the questions so there was a similarity in the questions, but still allowed that responsiveness to come from them and then be guided around those, but still coming back to a central point. And I did all the manual. I thought I was going to do all of the online, and I ended up going old school, post-it notes, paper, highlighters. I had every intention of being the electronic guru and just didn't go there. I used it though to triangulate to see if there were patterns or themes or data sets that I might have missed, knowing that thematic analysis isn't about the number of times somebody says something. It's trying to understand each person's lived reality and then see if there are patterns that I can draw information out of, but also acknowledging that the outlier or the outsider of a comment or a response is equally of importance. Knowing that what they are giving me has already been constructed and interpreted in their mind and then shared with me, and then I interpret and construct that. And then I did that 13 times and then collectively. So these are the themes that I found. This is what the data that came out of it. I thought I was going to get it done in about 3 months. Took so much longer than that to analyze the data and put it into some form of information and knowledge. So really they're built around an idea of conceptualizing what this one theme means. So theme 1 was really focused around processes of enactment. And you can see there that we have sub-themes of QCT process, school support, roles, and professional learning. The second one is around evidence and communication. So this was demonstration of practicing how I know that early career teacher is meeting the proficient level. And then how do I communicate that? And then the final one was around decision making. And these were the areas that were influencing the principal either consciously or subconsciously into their bias around how they make decisions. Because when you ask people how they make a decision, their ability to articulate that is actually very, very difficult. So just take a second. These are some data extracts that came from the principals. And when I say principal, sometimes the principal may have been a delegate, but on the whole, it was definitely somebody, either a deputy or an assistant principal in a senior leadership position. So Lily said that early career teachers are expected to gather evidence throughout their first year to be used in a physical paper portfolio, and then release time is provided to mentors to upskill them on how to get there. Ryan, I love this one. I think the graduate met with the instructional coach in putting their portfolio together. Not I know, I think. Keenan said, I want them to submit a paper or electronic portfolio. I want them to have a video of themselves as well, and then the video will give me more information later. There's no requirement for that. Paige, I just make it a 5-minute tick and flick to complete as fast as I can to check boxes, and then I press enter on the QCT form. That's it, done. Kane, now the system he's talking about is a Catholic system upon which this research was done. Kane was talking about the system has a booklet for early career teachers that's provided at the start of the year, plus a support person that came out for a day and explained what they'd had to do. 1 day out of 200. That's your support. Lewis said, I'd try to be fairly prompt and efficient around getting a teacher from provisional registration to full registration in the first 12 months. But as the principal, I have people to do the work with that early career teacher. I'll make it happen. I'll put whatever support I can, but that's not my role. It's someone else's role to do that. And then they support that early career teacher. Interestingly, Lewis actually said, this is the expectations that I have on the person doing this work with the early career teacher, and this is the expectation I have at the end. And Lewis actually had a light bulb moment in the interview where they said, but I don't think I've ever told them that. Yes, it was fantastic. Fantastic data, actually. It was so exciting to hear that. And then Mark said, I expect a conversation. I don't want any evidence. I don't want anything written down. I just want to have a conversation with that person. And then because what they do as a teacher, they plan and they assess and they meet with parents. We have all of that in our school system. I'll just use that, but I'll just talk to them. So great variance, not one that is right, not one that is wrong, but just varied. 2 minutes. Thank you. So I use an ecological systems model like I talked about, and this basically talks about the influences on the principal making that decision. So the very center, the microsystem, and the closer they are to the microsystem, the more influence they're likely to have, talked about how I make those decisions. So as you can see, as we go further out to meso and exo and macro, that they might have less impact. But again, that depends on me as the principal and how much I value something sitting in the macro system. So if I'm a principal and I value the QCT process, then that's going to have more of a direct influence on my decision than, say, something in the exo system. So top 5 findings. The leadership role of principal influences all components of the support that an early career teacher receives, from employment to proficiency. I heard someone say, I only employ good graduates. Educational and system policy or processes enacted at the school level are very much dependent on principal characteristics, how much they value their beliefs, their confidence levels, their skill set, and their knowledge. They've very few tapped into the system influence. It was there if we want it, but we won't tend to use it. There were internal and external factors that influence the support an early career teacher receives. So size of school, number of staff, experience of teachers working with them, their finances, what someone thought about a teacher might influence how I make a decision about them. Likability is a factor in international research as well. And then demonstration of evidence varied across contexts. Observation was the only consistent practice that occurred across all schools in this study. However, that varied from I might see them once across the 200 days, or I might see them 8 times across the year. And principals used a 2-pronged model to support an early career teacher. Everyone I interviewed wanted to see all of those graduate teachers grow as teachers. And secondly, they wanted them to meet their registration requirements. So just some initial recommendations. There needs to be a better, we need to really close that gap between policy and practice. And practically, how do we do that? Most policy falls down because we don't know how to enact it, because we don't know what it means. Professional learning came out as a big factor for all people involved. Provision of support and time and finances in school context is really, really important. And we know that from regional and remote school settings as well. And having a system response to what it means to be a mentor. So closing, I'm hoping that this new knowledge has potential to better understand how school principals make decisions about minimum standard teacher proficiency. Think back to that scenario that I gave you at the beginning. Hopefully it can inform some local policy and assist principals in developing rigorous decision-making processes. Thank you.
Thanks, Verity. Very thorough presentation there. Well done. Comments or questions from the floor for Verity? One up the back there, yep.
Thank you. I think it's such a needed study, and I don't know of any others that have happened. So
none in the I can't say none. Very few, or I can't find any
really
in the
great.
Australian context around the professional standards for teachers. Lots of research on leadership, lots of research on decision making, but not that I can find in the realm of the professional standards for teachers.
And the bias aspect, especially like in rural regions. I think it's really interesting to look at the whole picture of it, like whether it's, because a lot of people that I know too, like, you know, they've come from the city, they don't have any connections, and then other people are working with family members or, you know, principals that they grew up with, and it's really interesting to have that, like, see that aspect of it as well.
And very small schools. So there was a small school I worked with, and the principal was not only the decision maker, but they were that person's mentor. Yes. Because the school was so small, because it depends on context and finances. So more enrollments, more money, system support goes into that. But then how do people might move out of that school. So I had one principal say, I really want to do this because I really want that early career teacher to get the benefit of this, but I know in 1 year they're going to leave and another school will reap the benefits. So you kind of get really disheartened about what's the point. Like that's their day to day. That's what they're living with in that. So yeah, really, really interesting. Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
Thanks. Another question.
Thanks, Verity. That was very informative. I'm really keen to know more about your thematic analysis. I know you said it took a long time. Any good tips you may have or good recommendations for reading up on thematic analysis?
Yeah, Braun and Clark's 2022 reflexive thematic analysis. And I just keep going back to it all the time. But I think your way of being, like you said, be responsive to the phase that you're in. My brain goes quite methodical and linear, and I have to be able to keep going cyclical and keep coming back all the time, and just giving yourself the time to be able to do that. Like I feel as if I have been writing my findings and discussion chapter for probably about 18 months now, because my procrastination is just extremely strong. But every time I go back to Braun and Clark's work, it just gives me that prod to be able to step out and go, oh, that's what I was missing. So just keep rereading sections of it, and it keeps you going on the right path again.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Oh, one quick.
I have a small point to make. I don't know about different states in Australia. In Western Australia, university professionals, they coach, teach, organize workshops for teachers.
Yep. Yes.
I don't know in Queensland and other states, what's happening?
And it is varied. So in the Victorian state, that's actually an external board or an external group of people that review the early career teachers' portfolio. We don't have that in Queensland. Someone told me that they had done 18 portfolios in 10 years. Not one of them had been moderated by the QCT. So,
well, you've identified a huge gap there.
I would love to be able to talk to them at a later date. But thank you very much, everybody. Really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Well done.